What if the way that I eat oysters isn't the best way to do it? I'm going to try 9 different oyster preparations from around the world and rank them from the one I like the least to the one that I like the most. Now, the least favorite of the recipes that I tried is this gochujang oyster. Now, what you do is you take this gochujang paste and you're going to make kind of like a gochujang sauce to put on top of the oyster. It's pretty simple to make. I just put about a tablespoon of gochujang in there and then added some honey on top of that, a little bit of rice wine vinegar. Next, add some sesame oil. And the last thing that I put into this sauce is some soy sauce. Then I stirred everything up and got to shucking my oyster. After getting the oyster opened up, it was time to add the sauce. And what I did first was add a little bit of the sauce and then some toasted sesame seeds and of course a little bit of green onions as well. And now it was time for the taste test. And like I said, this was my least favorite one just because the sauce felt really heavy and rich. It didn't really pair well with the raw oyster. Next up is an oyster shooter. Now, if you've never had an oyster shooter before, basically what it is you're shucking an oyster like I'm doing here. And after shucking it, you're going to add it to a shot. Now, this oyster that I'm using and all the oysters I'm using for this video are farm-raised oysters from Massachusetts, and I got them from the Real Oyster Cult. I pay $79.99 to have these oysters shipped to my door, and I get 3 different varieties, and it's 10 of each variety, and I like them because you get to try all different oysters from around the Northeast especially. Now, to make an oyster shooter, all you're going to do is add some cocktail sauce. I like a little bit of Tabasco, and then you got to put in some horseradish, and I like adding a splash of pickle juice. Next, of course, you can add some liquor if you want to. I just added the oyster and now it was time for the shot. And honestly, it tasted exactly like you think it would. I don't think it was anything special, but I could see that someone that hasn't had a raw oyster before would really like this kind of preparation because it does mask the texture of it a little bit. The number 7 oyster is going to be one that I made with black vinegar and ginger. And basically what you do is to take some ginger, grate it, and then add a little bit of black vinegar. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have that, so I made some with soy sauce and balsamic vinegar. And I'm aware that's not a great substitute, but it's the best I could do because every single black vinegar I saw was not gluten-free, and that's just not an option for me. So after adding some green onions to it, I mixed it all up, and then I shucked the oyster. Once I got it shucked, I gave it a taste, and I gotta say, this was actually decent. And I'm curious if using actual black vinegar would make this taste even better. Comment below if you know a gluten-free black vinegar. Number 6 is going to be a simple one. It's just cocktail sauce, a little bit of horseradish, and some lemon. After shucking the oyster, I added the horseradish, some cocktail sauce, and a squeeze of lemon, and it was time to give this one a taste. Now, this is just a classic preparation. It tastes good, and it does play well with the oyster. You can't go wrong with this combination here. Number 5 is going to be a Filipino-inspired sauce, and what makes it uniquely Filipino is actually a little bit of this liquid right here. Now, this calamansi juice is something unique to the Philippines, and what I've heard, it kind of tastes like orange and lemon and grapefruit all mixed into one. Now, the sauce called for some diced red onions, a little bit of chili powder in there, and all I had on hand was some Korean chili powder, and then some diced up ginger, and let it sit for a good 15 to 20 minutes before putting it on the oyster. While the sauce marinated, I shucked the oyster. After I got the oyster all shucked up, it was time to add the sauce and give it a taste. And this probably was the most surprising one out of all to me. Never having the calamansi juice before made me kind of question whether or not I was going to like it, but it was pretty surprising. It had a grapefruit, and an orange, and a lemon taste all together, and it actually paired pretty well with this oyster. My number 4 topic is my take on ostiones preparados, and this is obviously a Mexican dish. Now, basically what you're doing is making kind of a salsa that's going to go on top of the oysters. I chopped up a Roma tomato and then diced up a little bit of red onion, mixed that all together with some cilantro as well, and of course, you got to add some lime juice to it too. Now, you're going to let this sit in the refrigerator for a little while so all the different flavors come together. And one of the most important things that you can add to this kind of recipe is, of course, a good hot sauce. In my opinion, I think this Valentina goes perfectly with it. And now it's time for the taste test. I loaded this oyster up with a lot of the topping, and I gotta say, you just can't go wrong with lime juice and hot sauce on an oyster. And the cilantro, tomatoes, and onion is just an added bonus. Now, the number 3 topping I didn't have to make. I got it directly from a jar, and it's gonna be the sichi, which is kelp kimchi. And I've had different flavors of kimchi on an oyster, but this is the first time I'm putting kelp kimchi on one. I put a hefty amount on this oyster, gave it a taste, and what I love about the kimchi and the oyster is the umami blast you get from both the oyster and the kimchi, and of course the spiciness from the kimchi as well. My number 2 topping to put on an oyster starts off with grating some daikon radish. Now, this daikon radish reminds me a little bit of horseradish, but a lot less pungent than horseradish. Next, I add some chili flakes, a little bit of citrus, and then some soy sauce. Now, you could also use ponzu sauce instead of the citrus and the soy sauce because ponzu sauce is basically that. And now it was time to shuck the oyster. I spooned a little bit of the sauce on top of the oyster, added some fresh green onions, and now it was time to give this one a taste. Right away, what I could taste was the daikon radish, but I liked the little kick of the chili powder, and honestly, this tastes like an elevated cocktail sauce to me. I could see a lot of people really liking this combination. And the number 1 oyster topping that I tried is this mignonette here. Now, mignonettes can be very, very simple, or they can be a little bit more complicated, but the base of a mignonette starts off with a shallot, and then some sort of vinegar, and then some cracked pepper. For my mignonette, what I'm going to be making is a little bit different. I did dice up a shallot, and then I diced up some jalapenos to give this mignonette sauce a little bit of a kick. Next, I chopped up a little bit of cilantro to add in there as well, and then to top it off, added just some regular old white vinegar. I let this sit for about 30 or 40 minutes before I put it on the oyster, but it's fine to sit in the fridge for a few days. I put a good amount of the mignonette sauce on there, making sure I got some of the vinegar as well, because that's key to this. Gave it a taste, and this is absolutely my favorite topping on an oyster. And honestly, this mignonette sauce is so good, I think I could just eat it all by itself.